Welcome, everyone. This is Two Guys Tech, a tech chat podcast, and I am your host, Rich Teslo, and I'm joined by my illustrious co-host, Branden Kastner. Branden, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm not looking forward to the 100-degree days we got going ahead in Oregon here, but that's just life in summer.
Next week is supposed to be an oven. I don't know how. It's like, what, hundreds?
Yeah. Keep in mind where you are. 100 may be your normal. For us, it's not our normal, and most people around here don't have AC, so it'll be a sweater. And not in a good way.
Not something you wear. It'll be something you're doing. It will be sweating. Okay. So this month's podcast is actually kind of an ominous one. All right. And are you ready for this?
Yeah, I feel a little bit like Chicken Little, like the sky is falling, but no one else seems to care.
No one
kind
cares,
of thing.
but us. But yeah, us. Okay. So here it is. I'm gonna give you the what it is. Okay, and that is the future of homelabs as you and I know it is coming to an end, right? And I know that sounds like hyperbole, because we'll talk about why it might be hyperbole, maybe not. But I want to paint a picture for you, okay, and for everyone watching. Okay, we are on the edge of a dramatic change in CPU power consumption in server CPUs, right?
Mm-hmm.
For example, I'm going to look through my notes here so I make say this right. Like the fourth gen Intel Xeon Platinum 8458P CPU has a TDP of 350 watts. Okay, That's a lot. And the AMD EPYC 9684X Genoa X CPU, which was just announced, has a TDP of 400 watts in a single socket. We're talking single chip oven.
How many cores did they say?
I think it's like
At the 96 one.
It's the 96 core. Yeah, I mean it's
That's a lot. That's a lot.
It is a lot. Yeah, and so so for people like you and me, who love to run server hardware in our home labs for a variety of reasons, it feels like we are looking at the beginning of the end of server gear in the home lab.
I think so. I also want to frame it a little bit of context here. This is maybe uniquely a North American problem.
That's that's
just it's a problem for Europe too.
Sure. For Europe data centers
in the long run, but maybe it's like a direct North American problem, because we have in the US we usually get 200 amps of service and 120 volts, and your average circuit breaker at a house is usually 15. Now it's more 20 if you get a newer house. And in businesses, it's always been 20 unless you spring for data center stuff, sure, 240 volt and stuff like that. So just to kind of frame that these CPUs, if let's say you run two of them, I think the X's can run in two configurations.
Yes, they can.
That's a possible 800 watts of just your CPU. No RAM, no disk yet, no any add-on cards.
Yeah, no overhead whatsoever. That's just the socket.
Straight on your, what is it? You get 1,500 watts, give or take, on your average 15 amp, 120
yeah,
watt circuit.
I think it's like technically 1,800 if you do the math.
But you got to stay 80%
yeah, you have,
below
exactly.
that, because, house fires.
Because your breakers are going to pop.
Doesn't bode well for people who like to have multi-node clusters like you and me.
Right. Yeah. So, and that's a good point. So I'm going to put this in perspective on what I'm running now. So downstairs in the home lab / Two Guys Tech's, entire production server room, which
always
is also
test in production,
which is my garage, just to be clear. I have a total of 2 nodes in a cluster, an ESXi cluster. Right? There are 4 sockets in each cluster, or in the cluster. So there are 2 nodes, 2 sockets each, 4 total, and they are E5 36, or excuse me, not 36, 2680 V4s.
The workhorse of the Dell R30 generation.
Yes, they are. And I still think that they're still one of the best pieces of silicon out there. I'll die on that hill. Anyway, I did the math. I went to my IPMIs on my servers. I looked and saw what the 7-day average consumption of power was for those hosts. Total of 133 watts to run all the stuff that we do here. That's, I'm not going to go into it, but like all of the things, all of the stuff that I do, the professional stuff and the home stuff, all that stuff, the plexes and all the funsy stuff. I also have another host that is the basically the storage server, right? That is got a bunch of hard drives in it. So obviously that's going to use more power than the compute nodes, which are just CPUs and RAM and whatnot. And over a 7-day period, that's only 277 watts. So it's more, but
Yeah.
there's 12 spinning rust discs in there, and there's a bunch of NVMEs and all that kind of junk. So 410 watts for my whole system, for all of it, right?
Yeah.
That's 6 sockets, 17 total drives. 410 watts feels like I mean, we have had people in the Discord go, yeah, that's still a lot. And yes, it is still a lot.
Of course. But I mean, it's not it's one of the future CPUs.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like, like the Intel one we were talking about, 350 watts on its own.
Yeah.
And that's not the overhead of RAM and storage in a motherboard. And it's just starting to feel like we're good right now.
Yeah.
But the end is near. I feel like I should have an A-frame sign around me. I should be standing out in the street corner screaming, the end is near, for homelabs, the server home.
Yeah. And well, I did some digging because I was like, okay, maybe it's just like this newest generation, or it's like just all in Rich and I's head and we're just noticing it. And I pulled up some Passmark. Your 2680 V4 pulls TDP of 120 watts.
Right.
So give or take, right? Your next step up, which is your gold 6143.
Okay.
That's kind of your like
First
where you would jump into your first scalable.
Right.
205. So you're already jumping up. And
wow,
for some reason, when you go to the second gen scalables, it went down to 150, which is still higher than the 120, but hey.
Interesting.
And then your third gen scalables and your fourth gen scalables are well above 230 each.
So within those generations, we essentially are seeing an exponential growth in power consumption.
Yeah. And
I feel like Intel and AMD were like, you know what? We just can't make them better anymore.
Yeah,
let's
right.
just shove more energy into them. So let's just do that. Let's just shove more energy into them.
I was like, well, we figured out 2 cores and we figured out 4 cores and now we're done doing efficiency stuff. So we're just going to slam it on. But no, I think it's actually because hyperscalers want you to throw in, as they want to break your TDPs because they have the additional cooling.
Okay.
They have the additional power room, and they want you to just put in as much power per watt you can drop into a CPU. And I think that's the like genesis of all this, kind of what begun all this. But it's the same thing on the AMD side. We start with 155 and we go up all the way to 400 now in our latest stuff. And I was like, oh, so this is a trend. It's not just like one-offs. It's not just we made a really nice CPU. It's like they're all growing at the same time.
I mean, I just can't. I can't. So I guess this leads to the next question, because so actually before I just want to say, it kind of breaks my heart a little bit. And I know it seems this is going to be like super nerdy melodramatic, so just go with me here. Like, one of the big reasons why I do run server gear is because I like to. Let's get that out of the way. But also because there was a period in my life when it had a huge impact on my professional ability.
Mm-hmm.
Like getting to touch that stuff. And you could say, oh, Rich, you just brought your work home with you. And that is true. I did.
It is. But that's, what it is.
But, as a professional, I can, at the time, especially when I was really getting into it, like I could go into it, anybody's data center, and be like, I know what these parts are, and I know how this still all works. I know the ins and outs of the stuff because I have it at home. I've got hands in it in a way that you can't do in an enterprise because they're not going to let you dig inside of a brand new server.
Yeah, and it gave me like familiarity with ESXi, especially, where like you hit a command line in ESXi and it's kind of like Linux, but not really.
Linux adjacent?
Yeah, it's like it's a Unix system.
Unix like, that's what they do.
You get lots of Unix commands to run, but like having that familiarity to go, oh yeah, EXCLI, ta-da,
yep.
And I know I know that directly because I broke something horribly on my server and I knew how to recover from it, or something along those lines. Definitely helps, but I don't, and it bothers me personally because it's like a recycling thing. Like
that's a good point. Let's talk more about that. Like,
because we were talking earlier about warranties from, say, like HP and Dell, and how they set them for 3 or 5, and then they really want you to get off of these things, mostly because they want your monies, but also because they old hardware and stuff like that. But I've, at least in my personal experience, taken care of gear, easily 7 to 10 years,
100%.
Assuming your compute capacity and stuff doesn't change.
Sure.
And like your biggest thing you're going to see when you upgrade is your storage. Going from hard drives to SSDs, it's just going to make life easier. But like in terms of raw compute power, it was really nice that you could sit on those things, and then you can obviously recycle them, or if your environment requires that you destroy all your hardware for some reason, that's fine too. But it was really nice that we could just go onto the eBays
Mm-hmm.
for, sub $500, pick up a nice powerful server that was loud, but maybe not squealing fans like a Switch.
Right.
And it could sit and you could practice on it and just practice Linux, practice Windows, whatever you wanted. And it gave, those extra servers, 2, 5, 7. I know some people who still run X CPUs from Intel, X5, what are they? The 5600 series?
Yeah, exactly.
They're ancient, but they work still.
Yeah,
they're doing plenty of compute.
And they make great firewalls. I know there's, my friend of mine is got an X5000 series, and it's his OpenSense firewall.
Yeah.
And he's got 10 gig in it, and it pushes it fine, right? Because it's a server CPU. Yeah, it makes me wonder. So are we headed to a point now, do you think, where all we're going to have are, energy efficient stuff in the home lab that is more consumer solely, or are we headed towards an ARM only world? And what does that look like when it comes to like doing all the things that we want to do?
Yeah. It's so hard to know because we don't really know how long the x86 instruction set's going to hang out there. It's been so far bulletproof and we don't really know.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't really want to try to run IE on ARM. Thinking about business cases, trying to run things like that just aren't meant for it. But maybe you are looking at the future is Raspberry Pis, or the future is RISC-V.
Maybe that could be there could be a groundswell with the RISC-V stuff. I don't think that the Pis or the low power. There's there's probably some people who are going to watch this and completely disagree. And by the way, tell us in the comments. I want you to disagree with me, because we're not the end all be all answers here. But when we talk about those ARM CPUs that are embedded in single board PCs, they still don't hold a candle to what you can get even out of ancient old x86 silicon. So unless there's a huge paradigm shift in ARM technology, I'm not talking about the Apple, I'm not talking about the Apple sort of stuff, because obviously Apple is building ARM silicon that really works, and they can build a specific software ecosystem to wrap around it so that it is fully optimized. But the general purpose ARM stuff that's in a Raspberry Pi, there's no ecosystem wrapped around. My understanding is let's say you're running Ubuntu on a Raspberry Pi, that's ported over, right? So it's not there's bits in there that work specifically for ARM, but really it's not the same as a bespoke OS that's been coded just like Monterey here or whatever. So I feel like there's a difference there.
Yeah.
There's a big difference. So yeah, that's do you think we're gonna see a shift in that?
Should I rip out my home lab and start putting in Intel NUCs? Or sorry, those are dead now.
No,
B-Link GT7s or whatever the hotness is this week. I don't know, because there's also some stuff that, especially when we're trying to do a home lab that is pseudo enterprise, you need ECC RAM.
Yeah.
And right now, none of my B-Links, none of my Dell Optiplexes, none of the...
Don't the AMD chips have a potential?
Support it, yeah. Well, sorry. It is available. It is not supported. The AMD does not support ECC on Ryzen or anything like that. They will let you do it. You can plug it in and it works. It's been shown to work many times, but it's very much your mileage may vary.
Yeah, and I can understand that. From the consumer desktop world, why would you need ECC? The cost of that RAM is obviously far more expensive than just getting regular non-ECC memory.
So I think about going low power though. We looked at that TerraMaster. Mm-hmm. That's a great low power NAS, and you can put TrueNAS on it, but you need ECC RAM for TrueNAS.
You should.
Let's just say you should. It's highly recommended by IX Systems, and I'm going to trust them on that one.
Yeah, that's my statement.
Is that ECC RAM is probably the way to go, and it's my valuable data. I probably do want some air checks in there.
Right.
I don't know. That's the tricky part for me, was thinking about is I could totally live in the low power world and stuff like that, but then I don't have ECC RAM, and that can be a deal breaker for lots of things.
Yeah, and I guess, if we also, and maybe I'm going to posit something here. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but I would propose that maybe I'm a little bit of a dinosaur in how I view home labs specifically, as these OSs like virtualization on bare metal. I know that I have a fair bit of Docker containers running, and that's still running in a virtual machine on top of ESXi hypervisor sitting on bare metal. And so maybe the answer in the distant future is just you're going to have a lot of clustered K8s, and you're just moving things around, but you still have the limitation of how much you can actually compute in something like that.
Yeah, and again, containers work completely different on that, in terms of how many pods have disk pressure, how many pods have CPU pressure, and stuff along those lines.
Yeah.
I do the same thing where I kind of have like my Nextcloud instance, and it's on a VM, and then everything is just shoved onto this one Docker host that's sitting on top of all my ESXi, and I'm just like, yeah, when Nextcloud starts recommending I move to a container, we'll start looking at that. But until then, I kind of keep them separated. But I don't know, because you still run into the issue of ECC RAM. Like, that's one of the things VMware really wants you to have for their platform. But I don't think it's the end, because there's also all just 5G operator equipment coming out there, and that's kind of where.
That's not actually. Let's talk about that, because I haven't seen much of that stuff hitting the secondary market yet.
It hasn't. It's just starting to hit like the 5G operators essentially to actually do edge computing. So there's 5G, which is all the people who are doing the computations for the 5G networks and stuff on your phones. Right. And then there are people who are also doing edge computing. And edge computing, for layman's terms, is as little hops as possible between you and the source of data. Imagine you want Netflix, but you want to access your Netflix cache server down the street. That's what you're going for, the edge computing. The only thing I've seen, which is still new, it's definitely not a like used enterprise thing yet at all, is the Gigabyte H242-Z11. And there are 2 revisions of them, and one runs the Milan series and one runs the is it Genoa? Not Genoa, it's the one under. There's Milan, and then there's Rome. That's what
Rome.
One runs Milan and one runs Rome. And there are they're a half-depth pizza box with 4 nodes in it that connects to each. There are 4 nodes, and each of them connects to a single U.2 drive, as well as having onboard M.2 storage.
Okay.
But they have, you can put 7502 EPYC 7502s in them. You can put the same processors I run in my home lab, which I think are 7302Ps. You can drop them all in there, and it can do full edge computing. And there are 2 power supplies that run it. They're 1300 watts. That's 4 sockets that are up there using a little bit amount of power. And that makes me really excited, because that's something I want.
No, that's awesome. I didn't realize that we were looking at. So maybe that it's a shift that's coming, not an end of days, but more of a specifically a shift here from like the big full depth rack server stuff that we're using to relay rack half depth pizza boxes. We just got to wait. How long till that stuff you think is going to hit a market?
5 years minimum.
All right.
I don't know. I wouldn't get looking on eBay right now.
I know. Get on your no.
I spec'd one out that was like a decent box, and it was around $10K.
And that's brand new money, though.
That's brand new stuff. If anyone's selling a O2 series, a Rome processor at full price, it's like $800 for a processor, you're getting ripped off. Which they were definitely trying to do that. And it's kind of like, those are like 3-year-old processors now. You can't really be charging full prices for them. But anywho, but I mean, even if you were like to say bare bones it, you're looking at 4K minimum.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, though, I was starting to think about it more, and there's this shift with AMD happening, but there's also this shift with the Open Compute project. Have you seen any of this?
I have not. No.
They just do straight 48 volt DC.
Okay.
On all rails all the time. You pull a sled out, it's got a specific connector that plugs in, and it's just giving you straight power. So they're not losing anything from the AC DC conversion.
They must have step down transformers stuff
elsewhere.
But actually inside on the motherboard, there must be a way that they take that 48 volt and then break it into 12s and 3s and 5s.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure they've figured that out.
But they feed it a straight.
But they're feeding it
interesting
as much as it can, which is pretty interesting.
So that would be interesting to have a rack where you're specifically dealing with essentially like a large AC/DC power supply that's feeding.
Yeah, and the way I've seen people think about it is like There's a battery rack, and that's your UPS. And then there's a compute rack, and it's just full of CPUs. And then there's a GPU rack, and it's just full of GPUs. And then there's a memory rack, and it's just full of memory. And that's like the overarching goal of this project. Not
Just
to
have break them down.
break them out, yeah, so that nothing matters. If you want 2 CPUs from here and 3 gigs of RAM from here and 3 disks from there, you can do that.
What is the what is the connection between those systems? How
They've all come up with standards for that. I don't want to like go too off into the weeds because it's super cool.
After we get off this podcast, I'm gonna go check it out. Yeah.
I also wanted to do a little bit of historical research.
Okay.
To go back to our power thing, servers on average back in 2000 drew 50 watts of electricity.
You know, I have some boxes.
You do?
That are like 20 watts, and there's like the Lenovo we use for the honeypot. I think it was like 50 or 60 watts.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then by 2008, they were already up to 250 on average. So this is like you take all
within
your data.
8 years.
Within 8 years, yeah.
Wow.
I can't look at that. And so they went. They did some metrics between electricity use is doubling between 2000 and 2005. It went from 12 billion to 23 billion kilowatt hours.
Wow.
How much data centers are going. And so they were talking about like the overall amount and how like data centers have essentially designed ways to take all the server heat and reuse it. I know some data centers that actually like heat their water with it essentially because of how much is coming out. And so they basically kept saying that like as we increase the amount of cores, we increase the amount of heat. But what they also wanted to add to it was as you increase the amount of cores, you were able to feed them more memory, which increased the amount of memory heat that was coming off too. And so I was reading this really interesting piece. I think it seemed like it was written from an Intel perspective on, yeah, right? I sat there and was like, I'm going to preface it, take it with a grain of salt, because I tried to dig into where it was, and it just was kind of like written by Intel. And I'm like,
is this marketing information?
Yeah. But they were talking about like how we keep stacking more cores and we keep feeding it more memory, and that, you know, now that we especially deal with AI, memory is what matters. And you had to keep those.
Or if you're an SAP HANA person, yeah, memory's all that matters.
Memory's all that matters, because that's where all the transactions are.
Everything's on memory.
But they were like, that's where, you know, you're seeing heat that you didn't think about. And we've gotten to the point now where like, I think those Genoas, aren't they liquid cooled? Or do they making liquid cooled systems for them?
At 400 watts, they have to be, because you start to reach a level where the amount of heat that's being output by those by the silicon in there has to be pulled away fast enough.
Yeah.
And the only way to effectively do that is with liquid cooling. So yeah, my reading about the Genoa X's, because they're still not technically out yet, was more like, these things are amazing and look at all these specs. And I'm just like, look at how much heat that they put out, right?
Yeah.
Or how much watts they output. And but yeah, you're gonna have to have completely different accommodations for that sort of thing, because otherwise you're not gonna be able to run them at full power.
Yeah, and like, I guess you have to have 30 amp circuits or 60 amp circuits. What?
Well, I mean, you could. We'll game this out. Let's say that there's 2 in a box, and that's 800 watts. And we'll look at this from the maximums, because, like you said, when they're not using all their power, they spool down, right?
Yeah.
They're efficient in that way. But in a data center, you're going to try to run these things at peak all the time, because that's why you spend all that money. By the way, those chips are like $11,000 when they hit the market. Side note. At any rate, so 800 watts. You throw in, let's say, probably another, I'm going to say there's another 400 watts just for overhead of just like the motherboard and the RAM.
Yeah.
You start throwing additional stuff in there, like hard disks, in case you're running that. Let's just say you hit around 13 to, you're probably at 15 amps safely.
If you throw a GPU in there.
If you throw a GPU in there, you're already probably over a 15 amp circuit at least, and you'll be looking at 20s, right?
Yeah.
So I would say on the conservative side, probably 13 to 1500 watts in a box.
Wow. I mean, that's on par with some gaming PCs though. I mean, we watched the 3090 had a 400 watt pull.
Yeah, it's true.
It had a recommended power supply of 1200 or 1000 or something like that for spikes, but we noticed it consistently pulls around 400 watts. So that's scary.
Yeah, I mean, I back in the days, and this is like inside but baseball, but back in the days when I was playing around with GPU mining of Bitcoin, I had a bunch of R9 290Xs, I had 3 of them, and I had a 1200 watt power supply, and it used all 1200 watts.
Did overcurrent not kick in?
And those GPUs you could run at 90 degrees Celsius.
No, I was waiting for this power supply to go like.
Well, power supply, it did weird stuff, but it never occurred. Like, this is way off topic, but like the lights in the room would flicker. They'd be like, oh, and I'd be like, oh, that's not good. That's really not good. And I'm in this room.
Or you're there like, I got a new coin. Like it flickered. And,
I mean, like, I never, ever, 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 ever hit a block. So let's just put that out there. This was a long time. This was back there like $300 a coin, $600 a coin. But no, I mean, like, seriously, I could get a lot of power out of that, right? But that was the limit of that circuit. There was nothing else that ran on that circuit in my house. That room was always 120 degrees, and there was no lights on in there at all because you couldn't run a light bulb because it would blow
outside the rest of the background.
Oh, and so anyway, I digress. But yeah, so it's but the data centers have they're like, so you talk about data center design and their approach to dealing with that stuff. Like, there's also a lot of talk about how in the world of, and not just like the global climate change and that kind of stuff, but actually like the power consumption and how they handle the heat, it's getting out of control for them too. Like, I remember, and you should remember this too because you're not that young, but I remember there was a time when Intel specifically was the one and only leader in the market, and this was like the early Pentium era. No, more like the Pentium 3, Pentium 4 era. And I remember, Intel went from being sockets, then they went to slots because of cooling, and then went back to sockets. And we were like, you just did that to screw with AMD, didn't you? Because they didn't allow them to do that. But at the time, they at the end of that arc, I believe there was this thing where Intel's like, look, we're going to change the paradigm because we can't just keep feeding it power to get faster because we're not getting anywhere. So that's when they switched from single socket, single core, high speed, right, to high speed at the time, to multi-core, slow speed in a single socket. And that changed, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, look, more cores, more energy efficiency, more everything out of this. And it feels like we've reached the end of that peak.
Yeah.
Like, now we're like, oh, we got to shove it all into it.
I also think Intel like panicked a little bit when Epic came out. They're like, oh yeah, to start power because like we got to keep up with these because like first gen Epic was meh, but second gen Epic was refined and it crushed most of their stuff, and I think it scared them, and so they were like, oh, okay, well we can reach 200 watts, we can reach 300 watts, like.
Oh man, imagine the engineering, like the head of the engineering department for the Xeon CPUs at Intel's just like, then does the knob go to 11? just turn up the knob.
The C-suite's like, can it do 12?
They're like, sir, we can't do that. Like, turn it up to 11, turn to 12. As far as the knob, we broke the knob off, right? It's like, that's how crazy it is. They're like, we don't know this. Like, and then Jeff Goldblum shows up and says something about how like your scientists were so you're interested in seeing if you could do it that you didn't think you should do it, and then here we are, and whatever. And
it is worth pointing out that like specifically for our cases, because though Rich and I run enterprise servers, let's say we probably hit 25 to 50% utilization overall.
Yeah, no, I mean,
let's say we actually kick it to 100. That the new servers are really good at doing things or really good at minimizing their power when they're idle.
Sure.
They've done a lot with the memory. They've done a lot with the disk, the type of, keep things low as possible when they're idle. I can't remember the name of it right now. It just popped in my head, but there's a new spec for, it's a requirement in California that, power supplies have to spin down to a certain,
interesting
state so that they are not consuming power when they're not in use, type of thing.
Okay.
It was kind of interesting to see that. So there's things like that. And servers have been doing this for decades. That's why they have 80 platinum power supply units, because they're getting the most efficiency out of it. It's why they get 240 volt, because there's less resistance in, so you're getting more efficiency there.
Mm-hmm.
So like servers are probably as energy efficient as they can get
under the circumstances.
Under the circumstances of what they are.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
It's just like, wow, if you're pushing 400 watts now and you need, now you need what's the new one? The GH300? Someone will correct me if I'm wrong there. It's the newest AI chip from NVIDIA, the Grace Hopper.
Oh, yeah.
So that probably has 96 gigs of VRAM, plus add in the 3 terabytes of RAM the Genoa CPU has, and you've got yourself a 3,000 watt system right there.
Yeah, exactly. That's a supercomputer of supercomputers in that case, right?
But yeah, I don't think it'll be the end. I just don't think I think those systems will go on the market and they'll do exactly what all the stuff that has C19 plugs on the market does right now, and just plummet in value the minute they're off.
Yeah, it just means that we won't be using our traditional NEMA 515s anymore. We're going to have a lot more.
And I mean, there's a cost to it, but it's not cost prohibitive to add a 240 volt circuit to your house.
No, you just have to get your two phases together to get that.
It's just good luck explaining that to your significant other. Why you need a 240 volt circuit for the house for tools that only benefit you.
I mean, there's actually I had a conversation with somebody about, like, because a while back we were talking about power consumption at home and how I had turned off one of my server CPUs, turned off one of my server boxes and kind of consolidated some stuff to try to cut down my power consumption, right? Because things were like, there's like my home lab, depending on what the PG power cost for that time, is roughly $80 to $90 additional cost to my lifestyle every month, right? So turning off that computer made no difference, as a side note. But
well, yeah, it depends where you're. Like here, I think we're around what, 11? 11 to 13.
It's 13. It's almost a 13 solid.
Oh yeah. So
things have gotten more expensive.
Where my parents live, it's I think 7 cents, 8 cents. They live in Texas.
Oh yeah,
it's a good day.
Texas is the freedom. In Texas, freedom is freedom with electricity, unless it's too cold or too hot.
That's true. The grid's not stable, but it is cheap.
That's why it's cheap, because you can't rely on
good UPS. Yeah.
So I guess the last thing, and we can close this up, is, do you think that, like, let's say that the 5G stuff doesn't ever come to fruition in a fashion that we can use? Do you think that your future home labs in the long term would be like multi-clustered nodes of 20, 30 watt devices like Zima boards or NUCs or something like that? Like, 'cause there's a lot of people who are doing that now. They're building Proxmox clusters off of Zima boards, and that's awesome.
Yeah, this is kind of an elitist home lab thing that we have extra watts to give up and extra a whole rack and all that. It's not just, we could probably get away with 4 or 5 Dell Optiplexes and a storage server and stuff like that, but we choose to because we want.
Because I want to.
We want to go as fast as possible. Do I think that'll change my outlook? Probably not.
No.
If nothing else, it's because there's just a plethora of older stuff all the time. I just won't be. I like to live semi near the bleeding edge, and maybe once we hit that stuff, I won't be able to live near that bleeding edge anymore. I'll just have to live with what I have, or move something else, or this stuff like the H242 I talked about will take off, and that'll be like the next thing, and we'll all have that in our rack. What about you? Are you gonna hold out like I am, or should you be picking up some Optiplex micros right now, and we'll get you practice on some Kubernetes and
it's a good question. I don't I have to seriously give it some thought, because from my perspective, I mean, full disclosure, I have a bit of an emotional connection to having iron. I don't know. I mean, it's just
very weird. I had to convince him to get rid of his what was it, your T7610 or whatever you had. I was like, you have a giant server that is a new Supermicro. You can get rid of it. He's like, but like my feelings are on it, and I'm like, I can't help you with that. You need to get rid of it. It's e-waste.
Oh so, and this is okay. They are my babies. Every single one of my servers that I've ever worked on, ever since I was a youngling to a 44-year-old adult, they are all my babies. They're not babies like my actual kids, but they're like my babies. Like, to be melodramatic, like when I shut down a server for the last time, I go to the shutdown prompt and then I type in, this is Windows, and then what is your reason for shutting down? And I write, "Good night, sweet prince, and may flights of angels sing thee to thy rest." And then I shut it off, and it's off forever.
Meanwhile, I'm out here just like, yep, next cattle's inbound.
You're like, open up the gate, But I can't help it. So, because I mean, they are like, it's just weird human anthropomorphic BS.
Yeah, for real though.
I'm not. I can't hide it. I just might as well just embrace it. Like I love these things like little children. So, I have a hard time, Brandon, I have a hard time throwing stuff away. And also on that, I like just having a hard time not loving real iron and thinking if I go back to little computers, then I feel like I am having like desktop computers. It doesn't feel home labby enough for me.
It's fair.
And that's all in my head. It's psychosomatic. It's psychological.
I love walking out my garage and seeing all the blinky lights. I
Me
know it's
too.
dumb, but like,
So yeah, I mean, there's people. There has to be somebody out there other than me and you who like it's just like the thought like there's a thing in the garage. Yeah, it's just using a bunch of energy, but it's babies. So I don't know. But I do think that in the long term, it really is going to come down to like a feasibility of power consumption and that kind of stuff. Because that's the problem that we have fundamentally is that things are getting more expensive, and there's a compromise to be made. I'm not at that point yet. And when these 4th gen Xeons and the 9600 series Genoas become like the de facto stuff coming out of hyperscalers, if that stuff even reaches hyperscalers in a way that we can have afterwards,
separate conversation.
yeah, that is exactly. That just won't exist. They'll just like, here's your sled. But then I think I'll be looking at a stack of computers. 'Cause, in the Discord, we're talking to people who are on single and multi-node Proxmox systems, and they're using what are they using between for storage sharing? What Proxmox uses, Ceph? Is that what it uses? Or
It probably just uses NFS or
but and that's their whole world. They can do everything on it, and that's awesome.
we had one guy the other day who was like, I do Kubernetes, Docker, and EC2 instances, and I'm like, you crazy bastard.
Yeah, that's the way of the future, I suppose.
But it's a future, right? Like,
Sure.
we could have another conversation about like, hey, did you know everything can't be containerized? But like, we'll keep this short for today.
I don't want to have like there'll be riots in the streets. Everything can be containerized. Well, I mean, okay. So yeah, I think that I will be looking at something else, but I still think it'll probably be more x86 or general purpose CPU versus ARM and lightweight stuff, just because there's more power in the box.
Yeah, for now. Like we'll see. I think Ampere 1 comes out soon. It was supposed to be that's NVIDIA's new Ampere stuff to compete with the Genoa
But
X. But
people can't buy that though, can they?
yeah, you can buy a system. They have like a full desktop system you can buy.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
I mean
It's not cheap. It's like $3,500, but I mean it's no more expensive than your average workstation going on.
Can they run Windows 11?
Probably with the ARM one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It'll run on anything. Okay, so I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, but I think that's so. I guess the final take here is: are home labs as we know it dying or not? Yes or no?
Not yet, but your time might be limited in the future.
Enjoy it while you can, people.
Yeah.
It's never going to get better than right now. It's only going to go downhill from here. All right. Well, I think we should probably close out the episode.
I think so.
Yeah. So, all right. So, thank you guys so much for listening. Again, you've been listening to our tech chats. We do this monthly, right?
Yeah, you try to.
Yeah, we try to do it. We have the goal to do it monthly, and it's available on every platform that's out there.
Yeah, I mean all the podcast scrapers and magic get it.
Yep. And so if you like it, make sure you thumbs up, or if you are a podcast listener on one of those big platforms, I've been told, and I have read that if you say you like something and you give it like a positive rating, that those systems bubble up further. I'm just happy to have you guys. That's all.
Or hop in the chats, tell us we're wrong. Tell us that we
right.
should just go pick up Xeon D51, was it 151s and shut up about it.
There you go. That's a good point.
It's just our problem.
Yeah. For sure. Speaking of that, though, we have a Discord would be the perfect place to go in there and tell us to get on Xeon Ds and just stop being babies.
They do tell Rich to get on Proxmox a lot.
They do. Someday I'm going to release a YouTube video. I'm just going to be like, fine, I did it. I'm on it. It hurts. Why does it hurt so much?
It hurts because we don't have DRS.
But so, as always, if you are interested in supporting us, you can become a YouTube member. Thank you to our YouTube members that are already membering for us and supporting us. We really appreciate you guys. If you want, you can buy some swag. I'm wearing some swag. Brandon's got swag.
We don't have hats yet, so I don't advertise my swag, but we got shirts and they're really good.
Yeah, and we're gonna have more coming as long as Brandon and I can come to agreement on
Okay.
Yeah,
That's news to me.
the design arguments are still fresh, but we'll get through it. And yeah, we'll catch you next month.
Yeah, I think so.
Thanks for being here, Brandon.
Yeah.
And thanks for watching.
Catch y'all later.